Thanks, Zach. Thank you, all of you people who are out there making this happen on the policy front. I am also really encouraged and hopeful to hear about everything that's happening. And I'm excited to share with you guys what's happening with ASHRAE 227. So just starting with some context, zooming back out to illustrate the three legs of the stool in the US coming carbon regulations that are driving zero net energy codes for new construction. We all know that achieving at least net zero ready is one of the fastest ways to decarbonize the built environment and take the pressure off the grid so that it can transition to more renewable production. And we also all know that every new building that's not net zero ready, at least, is soon going to be a huge liability for our owners and society as a whole. And we just don't have the time or resources to retrofit buildings we design today in 20 or 30 years. And then also the retrofit standards are coming. We have leaders there. And we've heard from our friends at NYSERDA that we need 9,406 retrofits per day or 783 retrofits per hour to meet those 2050 zero emissions goals in the US alone. And carbon limits are being put in place for existing buildings across the US, not just in New York, although they are leading the way. Massachusetts is close behind, California is leading the way, Washington. And there's also policy around cleaning up the electric grid. As of September 2019, Maine, New York, California, Hawaii, Nevada, New Mexico, Washington, and DC have requirements for 100% clean electricity by 2050. But we need all three legs of the stool to ground and support us in achieving climate action and ultimately climate justice. And while there are many jurisdictions at all levels leading the way, there are more that don't yet have a plan. And we need all of our communities to have access to a reference standard that gets the balance right and clearly lays out the most effective path to reduce operational carbon emissions for the life cycle of a building. And that starts with envelope efficiency first. So optimizing investment in envelope to the point of diminishing returns with backstops for comfort, resilience, and durability leads to the greatest emission reductions at the lowest construction cost premium due to reduced mechanical and renewable resource costs. We know this. This is basic passive house tunneling through cost barrier stuff with the highest life cycle savings. And this logic, the logic of this approach is so sound that it actually forms the core of the new ASHRAE 227 standard, which ultimately is a standard focused on zero emissions goals with all the best of passive house baked inside. That includes the collaborative expertise of the brightest minds at FIAS, PHI, and ASHRAE. So here's a long-term care facility where we can actually see that principle at work in a new trend I'm starting. Others have probably been starting it concurrently of incorporating carbon into our life cycle analysis now on every project, period. So the passive house path to net zero results in 33% greater emissions reductions than the most efficient non-passive house path. And at a net present savings of more than 2 million just for 20 years. This is only 20 years, not even 40. Effectively meeting 2040 emissions goals today with less renewable resources needed, no emissions fees within that 20-year time frame. And of course, we need to get to zero with no emissions fees for the life cycle of the building. But look at the passive house option down there. It's already all the way down at 4 kilograms per CO2 equivalent per square foot without renewables, right? Without renewables. And you can see in Massachusetts, at least in Boston, that cost for alternative compliance payments, it's not quite as high as in New York City, but it's at $234 per. So, that adds up in the other non-passive house options. So really the purpose is to take the best of what we know how to do, which is passive house, and take the best of what ASHRAE is developing because they keep pushing the standards forward and bake that into a two-model approach. We've got a baseline model, but the baseline model is passive house. It's got all the passive house best practices baked into it. And then you have a proposed model that you can use that must be at least as good as your baseline, but allows for some trade-offs. And so right now, the first draft of the standard is in process, and our next committee meeting, all of our working groups are going to share their draft language with the main committee. Our working groups are organized around the Passive House principles. We've got all of these Passive House principles in the space conditioning working group that you see here. In our supportive requirements working group, we've got thermal bridges, moisture management, ventilation. And then we also have an air tightness working group. And then lastly, an energy and carbon working group that not only looks at system performance and what metrics that we're going to be looking towards ultimately, but looks out beyond. And there's been a lot of collegial cross-pollination with folks on various ASHRAE committees so that we can all align. And even ASHRAE itself is turning towards carbon metrics. Even 90.1 is turning towards carbon metrics. So ASHRAE 227 is going to align with ASHRAE 228 for definitions of zero energy, zero carbon, how on-site, off-site, and renewable energy certificates are treated. It also will align with the newest versions of ASHRAE 62 for ventilation, 55 for comfort, 160 for moisture, as well as current Passive House ISO and EN reference standards. And the great thing about it is that it's allowing flexibility or agnosticism in terms of using either future-looking source energy per NREL data, PHI's PER approach, FIA's source energy, or any other hourly emissions data, national, regional, or local that a jurisdiction cares to apply to it. So it's flexible. It also expands access and reduce barriers to adoption by allowing all new and existing construction to adopt the rigorous building science that is Passive House without forcing authorities having jurisdiction to go through our existing certification bodies alone. Also, it's expanding access by opening up compliance modeling to any ASHRAE 140 validated software tool, as long as you use the same software for target setting model and your proposed model. So that means free open source software tools like Energy Plus and the whole Grasshopper Ladybug tools environment, as well as eQuest, IAS, PHPP, Woofy Passive, all of it. It's all going to be able to come into play. And with new advanced web-based tools and graphical user interfaces in development with open APIs, an increasing need for data-driven decision-making, as everyone needs to get to those decisions faster, and they're not Passive House experts like we are. Flexibility is really important, and the use of big data is really important. So ultimately, by using ASHRAE 227, which is consensus-based, extremely flexible and software agnostic, we can also increase access to the best practices in cost-effective carbon neutral design for designers that simply don't have time to reinvent the wheel. And together, developments in progressive standards and open source tools will empower our whole industry and those seeking to join us in increasing the velocity and effectiveness of our climate action. Now, in terms of equity and accessibility, ASHRAE 227 is using a consensus process to crystallize and simplify Passive House technical expertise, but any reference standards need to be consensus-based. Now, while the committee itself is largely Caucasian people that most we would consider to be privileged, the standard is open to public comment, and a first draft is due out this fall. And we are first relying on all of you to read and comment. And then my hope is ultimately that our community will also take 227 to local groups to educate and get feedback. So instead of the rooms being all white, like we're looking at in this picture, of adopting a net zero code for Massachusetts, we get feedback from diverse rooms with diverse faces, diverse backgrounds and perspectives that can take something like 227 and make it their own, add to it, add to the ready-made bake mix, add the blueberries, the chocolate chips, the frosting, the sprinkles, whatever you want, and use it as a springboard for climate justice. Thank you guys for listening, and I'm hopeful for your participation as we move this thing forward.